Okay, so we were up to siman lamed gimel, and I'll remind you. Last time we saw that we said the halacha lo Moshe Sinai is that the ritzuot of the tefillin need to be black, just on the side that's facing outwards. That's the only part that needs to be black. Halacha lo Moshe Sinai. The batim and the inner part of the ritzuot can be of different colors. But they just have to correspond. In other words, to make the inner part of the ritzuot the same color as the batim. Lemaise, the Rambam advises to do everything black, and that's what we do. We definitely do the batim black. Regarding the inner part of the ritzuot, for a long time, the minhag was not to make it black, just to leave it colorless. Nowadays, it's become more common, to make the ritzuot fully black throughout, and then they're black on both sides as well, which is what the Rambam advises. Okay, now we'll get into in seif daled. The question is of doing this lishma. So here, this is a general question that comes up in many issues in Hilchot Tefillin. What exactly needs to be done lishma in the making of the tefillin? So here, the two are quotes, Sefer HaTruma. He says, וכתב בספר התרומה, שצריך שישחירן ישראל לשם תפילין ואין להשחירן על ידי גוי. So Sefer HaTruma says, and here the Beit Yosef points out that he didn't say it as a vada, he was like מסופק about it, but he says here, שיש להסתפק אם גוי יכול להשחירן לבדו כמו שאר תיקוני אור, או שמא כיוון דרצועות שחורות הלכה למשה מסיני צריך השחרה לשמה, ואסור בגוי כמו גבי ציצית, דבעינן תביעה לשמה וגם צביעה לשמה, והמחמיר תבוא אליו ברכה. So he wasn't saying it for definite, because even though the halacha Moshe Sinai is that it has to be black, who says that it needs to be done lishma? But lemaisa he says because it is halacha Moshe Sinai, so therefore it needs to be done lishma, and therefore a goy cannot do it, because a goy, as we know, when he's doing things, he's not considered to be doing it lishma. Okay, so let's see the Mishnah, the Shulchan Aruch on this. The Shulchan Aruch says also, Tov sheyashchiren Yisrael lishman velo ino Yehudi. So from the words of the Mechaber, he seems to treat it as a chumrah. In other words, Mikar Din doesn't say anywhere in the Gemara that the blackening of the ritzuot has to be done lishmas, but he says it as a chumrah because of Sefer HaTruma, Tov sheyashchiren Yisrael lishman velo ino Yehudi. The Ramah, however, says, Hadal miu b'diavad kasher im ishchir or abatim, aval ritzuot afilu b'diavad pasul. So the Ramah is more machmir, and he learns that the ikar adin has to be done lishma, but that's only by the ritzuot, because the ritzuot, that is the halacha Moshe Sinai, that they need to be black. But the batim midoraita, it doesn't have to be dafka black. So therefore, he says by the batim b'diavad, if it was colored by a goy, it's kasher, because the whole blackness of the batim is not me'akiv. But by ritzuot, where there is halacha Moshe Sinai, so if a goy did it, then it's pasul. Here the Mishnah Berurah points all this out, and he says, Tov, אבל בדיעבד כאשר לידי אפילו על ידי אינו יהודי, אפילו ברצועות לא בעינן השחרות לשמה. In other words, according to the Mechaber, even if the goy did the coloring of the רצועות, even that's kasher. ורמה והגה חולק עליו, הסביר על ידי ברצועות, השחרות הוא הלכה למשה מסיני, צריך השחרות לשמן, וממילא בעינו יהודי אינו עושה לשמה פסול. But in other words, and the Ramah says no, by the ritzuot, where it's mikar adin, it has to be black. So then a goy cannot do it, and there it's makiv. But the ora batim, the lorov poskim shacharuto limitzvah ba'alma or liikuva, לכן לא בעינן די גם כן השחרות לשמה ובדיעבד, והבה לי לכתוב בהגעתו בלשון יש אומרים, אך מצינו כמה פעמים כיוצא בזה. In other words, even though the Ramah should have used the word יש אומרים, because really he's cholek on the Mechaber, nevertheless, we find in some places that the Ramah argues with the Mechaber without saying it, completely explicitly. He's somehow able to attach his Haggah to the Mechaber, even, without clearly saying that he's arguing, then the Ramah will do that. But he says clearly there is a machloket here between the Mechaber and the Ramah. Okay. Now a few other details. So here, and here the Mishnah Berurah really sums this all up. He says here in Sif Katan Kaf Gimel He says, וכל שכן, בכל דבר שצריך בתפילין גופה לעיכובה, כמו עשיית הבית והשין שלו בכל פרטיו, שיהיה כדין, או תפירתו או עשיית הקשר שלו. In other words, any of these things, making the bait, the shin, the tfira of the bait, making the kesher, בכל אלו הלכה משה מסיני, אם עשאן ישראל שלא לשמן פסול. These have to be done lishma. And if it was done שלא לשמה, then it's pasul. Here in the Biur Halacha, I'll just make a side note, he has a discussion, what happens if you did it bistama? In other words, you weren't thinking shelo lishma, you weren't thinking lishma. He says, really, lechatchila, you should have kavanah lishma. But regarding all those things that, it's not so clear that it really has to be done lishma, it doesn't say it in the Gemara, so he says, bistama is also kasher as long as you did not have kavanah otherwise. But lechatchila, you should, each one of these things say that you're doing it lishma properly. בכתב הפרי מגדים, ויש למנוע מלעשות כל זה על ידי קטן, אפילו אם גדול יעמוד על גביו ויצווהו לעשות לשמה. וכן שלא לעשותם על ידי אישה וכל הפסולים הם מבואר לקמן. So all these things, making the bayit, the shin, and all these things, you should not even do גדול עומד על גביו. Why? Even though there's a sugya in Masechet Gitin, which is mashma, that again, there's a machloket rishonim how we rule on that Gemara. But according to some rishonim, what comes out that even a katan, if he has what we call gadol omed al gabav, in instructing him to do lishma, then that turns the ma'isa of the katan into lishma. So, but the Pri Megadim here says that on all these things of the making of the bait itself, of the tefillin themselves, you should not rely on that and not even do gadol omed al gabav. Rather, a Yisrael gadol should do it. והשפרת הרצועות, וזה איננו בגוף התפילין, מותר על ידי אישה די יודעת לעשות לשמה כמו איש, אבל אינו יודעי וקטן, אינו מותר עד שיעמוד אחר הגבם, וכדלאי לעניין קלף וסימן ל"ב. So he says, but regarding the blackening of the רצועות, because that's not in the tefillin themselves, that we can be more lenient, and that we can do with a gadol omed al gabav, instructing him how to do it. He has your whole discussion on in the Biur Halacha why exactly he rules that way, and he says here at the end. But he says, bottom line, he says at the end that since it's not so clear that the blackening of the Ritzuot needs to be done lishma, as we saw anyway, the Sefer HaTruma himself was mesupak on it. The Mechaber thought it was more of a chumrah, so then we can rely on if a katan does it with gadol omed al gabav, because according to at least some rishonim, the gadol omed al gabav makes it lishma. It's interesting. I don't know if you heard of it. There's somebody who has a project called, I think it's called Kesher Tefillin. It's supposed to be a nice. I haven't seen it. I just heard about it. It's supposed to be a nice project where the kids make tefillin themselves. He came up with a whole system. It's obviously not with all Be'emad sites, with all Be'emad Daka, but that it's a project that they do with kids before their bar mitzvah, that they make their own tefillin. Anyway, so we were publishing in the next volume on that project exactly what parts are the kids who are not yet bar mitzvah, what they cannot do. It must be done by a gadol. Like here in the Mishnah Berurah says, what parts they can do themselves, but with gadol omed al gabav, and what parts of the making of tefillin, they're allowed to do on their own completely. If anybody's ever encountered that. But, seif. Okay, seif now gets into the question of, I'll share on the source pages, of what happens if one of the ritzuot gets ripped. What do you do then? So there's the Gemara on this in Masechet Menachot. Gemara says, Abaye havayativ kamei Rabbi Yosef ifsik le retzuah de tefillin. So he, again, one of his retzuot of the tefillin got cut, ripped, torn, whatever, detached. Amar le ma'u lemikterei, so he said, am I allowed to tie it back together? Amar le ukshartem ktiv, sheteheh kshirat tama. In other words, the kshira needs to be complete, and therefore, if you tie it up together, it's not considered kshirat tama. Rashi here brings two explanations why it's not kshirat tama. One explanation is sheteheh kshira na'ah. And if you have another knot there besides just the knot that is supposed to tie the tefillin, tu lo havi kshira yafa, doesn't look nice. Or another explanation is kshirat tamar ritzua shlema v'lo kshura. It has to be complete, whole, and if it's tied together, then it's not considered whole. What happens if instead of tying it, I'll just sew it together and I'll put the stitches on the inside where it won't be noticeable, and towards the outside it will seem like a full ritzua. So he said, go and see what the minhag is. But here Rashi explains, in other words, if I just do the stitches and on the inside it won't be noticeable. And it will look nice, it will appear as if it's a full ritzua. So he says to him, so the answer is not so clear. What does it mean, go and see what the minhag is? Well, what is the minhag? Is the minhag to do it or not to do it? So Rashi explains it. So Rashi explains that's not a good solution. And you cannot even sew it together. Tosfot quotes Rabbeinu Tam, who explains it just the opposite. Tosfot says, Pirish b'kuntres lachmir, Rabbeinu Tam mefarish le'akel. In other words, according to Tosfot, Rabbeinu Tam said, Puk chazi maya davar, that the minhag is to sew it together. The Rambam also rules like Rashi, and the Rambam writes, Ritzua shenifseka en koshrin ota, ve'en tofrin ota, ela motzi'a ve'gonza ve'osin acheret. Okay, and he says, so the Rambam also understood like Rashi, that not only we do not tie it, but also we do not sew it, and the ritzua has to be replaced. The Rosh brings more proofs for Rabbeinu Tam, but he adds a few details. And he says, he quotes a Yerushalmi, that's mashma that when you sew the tefillin together, you should use gidin, the sinews to sew it together. The same gidin that we use to sew the batim themselves. Also, if you need to sew a ritzua, again, following where Rabbeinu Tam that allowed that you should use gidim to sew it together. And here the Rosh adds another point. He says, "Umayri ben nifseka ritzua makefet harosh ve'azroa, dehatam ba'inyan kshirat tama shelo yu shama shnei ksharim. אבל לרצועות התלויות למטה לא שייך בו קשירה. שנאמר, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך והיו לטוטפות בענייניך דווקא על היד ועל הראש ודכתיב בקשירה, למיעוט היא קשירה שאינה תמה. אבל רצועות התלויות לא שייך לאסור בו קשירה ותפירה. Okay, in other words, according to the Rosh, even if we say that you cannot tie the ritzua together, that only applies to the section of the ritzua, which is where the tefillin are tied to the body. In other words, the part that's wrapped around on the arm at this point, which is tying the tefillin shilyat to the arm, or in the shidrosh, the part which is surrounding the head. Why? Because that's where the Torah said ukshartam, that I'm tying the tefillin to your body, and that has to be kshirat tamah, which means that the ritzua has to be whole; it cannot be tied together. But on the other part of the ritzua, extending along the arm, or coming down across your body on the tefillin shidrosh, according to the Rosh, that if it gets cut off, you can tie it together. So together, Rabbeinu Tam even allowed on the part which is directly on the yad and shalosh. The Beit Yosef, he brings some opinions that are more machmir, and say no, any part of the ritzua which is ma'akiv needs to be whole. However, even then, we know that our ritzuot are longer than was required, right? Because the shilyat, for example, it's enough of a length that it just reaches the middle finger without doing all the ritzuot along the arm. So therefore, he brings here a Tumat addition who says that as long as the ritzuah shel yad is long enough without the part tied together to reach from the arm here until the end of the middle finger, then that's enough, and you don't need to include all the length of the ritzuah that's become longer because you're using it to tie around your head. Also, the tefillin shidrosh, it just needs to get up to, I think it's the belly button until the tabu. So anything beyond that would not be necessary. In the Darkei Moshe here, he says even less. He says by tefillin shalosh we can be even more lenient. I'll show you why. He says, "ואינו נרד, יש לומר דווקא בשל יד אסור לטפול בכל השיעור, משום דכולו צורך הקשירה הוא, משום דבלאו אינו עומד על הזרוע, אם אינו כורך סביב האצבע או הזרוע, ובשל ראש ומודקין היטב בלא רצויות התלויות, נראה דאין לפסול שם התפירה רק סביב הראש." In other words, he wants to say that even if we're more machmir by shibyad, by the part that extends until the middle finger, that's only because that's still part of the necessary part of tying the tefillin shibyad, because it won't hold together just where I tie it on the arm if I don't tie it further along. But shel rosh, that it's just hanging, it's not tied to anything. So he says that there's no ikuv at all. Let's see what's ruled in the Shulchan Aruch on this. So he says in Sifrei, im nifseka haritzua, yesh matirim litfor mitzad pnim. That's the shita of Rabbeinu Tam that allows to sew. ויש אומרים, מה שמקיף ממנה הראש ובשל יד כדי שתקריף הזרוע לקישור התפילה, עם הזרוע, וכדי שתימתח עד אצבע ימנית ויקרוך ממנה על אצבע ג' כריכות ויקשור, אין להם תקנה לא בקשירה ולא בתפילה. So he's calling the Yesh Omrim as a bit more machmir, that it's anything that surrounds the head or the yad, but also in the yad he says until the distance that's needed to reach the middle finger to do 3 kshirot on that. All of that you cannot sew it. לכל יתרון האורך שהוא בשביל שכורך הרצועה כמה פעמים סביב הזרוע, ובשל ראש מה שתלוי ממנה אין התפילה והקשירה פסולים בה. But anything of the ritzuot which is longer because I need it to go around my zroa or the rosh and the hanging part, that the tefillah and the shira are not מעכב. בשעת הדחק יש לסמוך על המתירים כדי שלא תתבטל מצוות תפילין. He says בשעת הדחק you can rely on the lenient opinions. Here the Mishnah Berurah says, according to the first opinion that allows tefillah, again it's just, as we said, it should be tefillah dafka begidim, and it should be dafka tefillah on the inside, that it won't be noticeable to the outside. And he says here, ספר אליהו רבה הכריע להלכה דבין בשל ראש ובין בשל יד, לבד מה שיש בתוך שיעור המקיף הראש והקיבורת, יכולת עופרו אף שלא בשעת הדחק ולברך עליהם. אך צריך שיזהר לתפור מצד פנים שלא יהיה מנקר התפירות מבחוץ, דף אם מנקר לא עדיף מקשר. So he says, again, he says better if you can get a רצועה שלמה. But he says, if you have the part which is, because in other words, if let's say I do tefillah on anything which is beyond the part that's actually, where it's tied to my body or tied to my head, then it's like a sfeika to go lekuda. Why? First of all, there are Rishonim like Rabbeinu Tam and the Rosh that always allow tefillah, even on the part that actually ties to your body. Even if we're machmir like Rashi and the Rambam, again, that's only on the part which is actually tied to the body, because there we have the kshirat tamah. But in any further part of the ritzuot, maybe it doesn't apply to that. So based on that, he says anytime the ritzuot are longer, obviously better to just get a new ritzuah. But if you can't, or until you can, then you can sew it from the inside, and you can rely on that. If somebody can't even do that, and he needs to tie together, then as we saw, that's what the Chaber says, b'shat adchak, you could do that, but you could do that as well. All right, any questions or comments?
Why wasn't doing the Havamina?
What?
Or it's the same song together?
I'm sorry?
Why wasn't gluing it together being a Havamina?
Doing it together.
Or is it the same as sewing it together?
I guess if it's not noticeable, it would be like sewing, but maybe then it's better to do tefillah begidim, because that's sort of, that's what they said. You do it like other tefillot that you do by tefillin, that we do with...
Just in a practical case, like not when people have gidim lying around.
Yeah, it's more practical, that's for sure. What I did see is a tshuva of the Chilkat Yaakov, which could be useful, that he says that if you see it's beginning to tear, but it hasn't torn completely, and there's still a shiur left, again, the shiur only needs to be keseorah, the width of the ritzuot. So he says in that case, you can just take something like a matlit and glue it together to hold it together, and he says that's permitted, because the ritzuah itself is still kasher as it is. I'm just attaching something to it to prevent it from becoming pasul. So at least in that case, you could do it. I'm not sure about... It sounds like, from the fact that they said tefillah begidim, it sounds like they're makbid to do it dafka in that way. Okay, all right, very good. First, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ishakar.